Time is of the essence when identifying and resolving issues in your software, and our friends at Raygun are here to help. Their brand new alerting feature is now available for crash reporting and real user monitoring, and they'll make sure you're quickly notified of the errors, crashes, and front-end performance issues that matter most to you and your business. You can set thresholds for your alert based on an increase in error count, a spike in load time, or new issues introduced in the latest deployment, along with custom filters that give you even greater control. You can assign multiple users to ensure the right team members are notified, with alerts linked directly to the issue in Raygun that'll take you to the root cause faster. Never miss another mission-critical issue in your software again. Try Raygun Alerting today and create a world-class issue resolution workflow that gives you and your customers peace of mind. Visit raygun.com to learn more. Their simple usage-based plans start from as little as $4 a month, with unlimited apps and users. That's raygun.com, raygun.com, to start your free 14-day trial. Hi, this is Scott Hanselman. This is another episode of Hansel Minutes. Today I'm talking with Evan Amos. He's a video game photographer of high-quality stock photographies of video game consoles and the author of the wonderful The Game Console 2.0, a photographic history from Atari to Xbox, published by No Starch Press. How are you, sir?
I'm fine, thank you. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, true story. A friend of mine gave me this book for Christmas. And he said, I saw this and I thought of you. And those are always wonderful things when someone sees an object in the world and they think of you and they say, I thought of you in the world. You weren't there. And I handed and he wanted to see the reaction. And I said, oh, okay. Video game con. And I opened it up and I just lit up. And I was like, oh my, then I just page after page after page of just nostalgia and history, and not just pictures of video game consoles, but the insides of them and explosions. And what are these called when you take apart?
I call them break aparts. It's like I take all the pieces out of something like a controller or a video game console, and then I photograph them individually, like where they should be. Mm-hmm. And then I stitch all those photos together in Photoshop.
Wow. So on its face, if you look at this simplistically, it's kind of like those Marvel books that we had in the 80s, which is like every superhero, and just every page is a new superhero. Every page, there's a new video game console. So I showed it to my wife and she says, it's just pictures of photography, because people say just to minimize stuff so they can better understand. She's like, oh, it's just pictures of video game. But it felt to me like it was a bringing together of decades and decades of history. There's a bigger story here than just a book full of pictures of video games.
Mm-hmm. So this project, me taking photos of video game consoles, started like way back in 2009, and it started on Wikipedia, which we all know and love. I don't have to explain Wikipedia. But the best thing about Wikipedia is that you can contribute to Wikipedia if you want. Like you can go from like reading about stuff to being like, oh, this sentence isn't quite right, or I'd like to expand on this section because I know something or I've read about it, so you can contribute to it. And I, at the time, like in 2009, I was reading a bunch of video game history stuff, like, stuff about the consoles, and then you click the links in the articles and you get taken to all sorts of places. You just go down that rabbit hole. And in kind of doing that, like I was just reading about all these video game consoles. And one of the things that really struck out to me, which is something that's a big problem with Wikipedia in general, is that the pictures in the articles are terrible. It's pure amateur hour because Wikipedia, at least photo-wise, is completely contributed to by amateurs. The reason for that is when you upload a picture onto Wikipedia, you have to put it in a free license, which means that you're giving away your ownership of the photo. And if you're a professional photographer or you have photos that you make money off of, you never do that. So the level of people contributing photos and stuff is like a very specific hobbyist guy with a camera. Like he went out to a street, he photographed a building, and then he uploaded it. So it's really a different league compared to like the standard professional photography that you would see in like editorials on like news sites and stuff like that. I had a photo background. I worked in a 1 hour photo when I was in college, and just being in the 1 hour photo lab made me get interested in photography to the point where I just like, oh, I'm going to go buy a camera. Like I got like an old Nikon film camera that I found at a garage sale. And then it was, like an SLR with the lenses and everything. And that became my stepping stone into like the photo world and actually taking photos. And the way that I did that is I just went to the library and I checked out like all the photo books that I could find. I mean, this was like, mid 2000s, 2000, like 6, 5. So this was really, there was websites, but you would still go to the library sometimes back then. And then I just started doing it in terms of like, I was really interested in portrait photography. So I would grab friends and I would get like a roll or two of film and be like, we're just going to go to the park and I'm just going to take photos of you. I like the idea of like a very specific kind of like controlled environment in terms of being like I wouldn't try to do street photography, go up to random people. But I like the idea of like, oh, you and me, let's go to the park and then I'll try to get like good pictures of you, make a session. And over time, I bought like the equipment, like you get the better lenses. Have you gotten into a hobby that made you spend money?
There's a wonderful TikTok where they talk about the intersection between hobbies, money, and ADHD, and how you pick a thing and you obsess about the thing, and then it becomes where all of your extra money goes until you have collected and all the things, right? Like for me, having and possessing and using retro consoles or less 30 years, collecting them is a thing that I do as well. You get one and then you have to have them all. It's like Pokemon.
Well, sometimes it's just even like the joy of like reading about stuff. Like I remember like when I first started, like I would read blogs about like hardware reviews. And then you get excited about the idea of like lenses and everything. And it's not even like using the lens to go take pictures. It's more about like, ooh, this is a really good lens. And it's stupid, but like you get into it. But no, so I got like a bunch of good photography stuff and then I was taking pictures of my friends. And at some point, I kind of just fell off of that because you really can't keep asking your friends to do it over and over again. You know what I mean? So I did things like I would go on Craigslist and just be like, do you want to take photos? Like, we'll meet up, and I did that for a while. And then I just kind of stopped because sometimes you fall in and out of hobbies, you know? So I had stopped doing the photography stuff for a little while, but I had all the equipment with me still. And then when I was reading on Wikipedia, I was looking at the articles and I was like, oh, these pictures are terrible. It was specifically the Nintendo GameCube article. And it was like, I have a GameCube in the other room and I have this photo equipment, like the lights and everything. Like, I'll just, set it up and take a picture of it. I had when you're doing photography, portrait photography is much different than product photography. There's like different, groups of photography: landscape photography, street photography. So, well, you can apply some of your skills from portrait photography into product photography, like the understanding of the lights and everything. It's still like very different because it's like you have to make sure the item's really clean, the staging of the thing, the way that you do it consistently for lighting. But like when I started the project, it was both me wanting to contribute to Wikipedia and just thinking about it as some small thing. Like, oh, I'm just going to improve this page. But it was also like, oh, this is a chance for me to teach myself product photography. Just like I, took my friends out to do product or portrait sessions, like sticking items on a table and trying to make them look good. It's like, something to do. Get back into photo stuff. The problem is when I started doing it, I got really bit hard in terms of the enjoyment of it. And so it was like, I enjoyed trying to learn how to do the product photography, getting into it. But I also like the idea of, going in and cleaning up all those pages on Wikipedia, where it was like, okay, I do the GameCube. What other consoles do I have? I have the PlayStation, PS2, NES. And then you just start doing those. But then you start making a list of all the pages that could be done. And then you discover like all the crazy consoles, the stuff that you never heard of. And then you just kind of think to yourself, it's like, how many could I do? How far could I take it? And what I did is I went back to like Craigslist and Reddit and stuff like that. And I was just putting things out there. It's like, do you guys have video game consoles? Would you mind letting me take photos of them and stuff? So I was just looking for collectors, for people that would let me, come by with my granny cart full of like photo gear. And I live in Brooklyn and I live in New York City. So I didn't have a car. So like some guy in Long Island was like, sure, like I'm an eBay seller. I have a bunch of stuff. Come see me. So I got all my photo stuff in a granny cart, got on the train, up and down stairs, on the subway, get to his house, and he just picks me up in his car, and I just drive out to some stranger's house, and he had a bunch of stuff. And I spent like a few hours there doing that. And, and I got a lot of stuff. And I was so excited because it was like, oh man, I got the Sega CD Model 1 or, the 32X. Like, I don't have those. My own video game collection at the time was very limited to just popular things that I had growing up, like, NES, PS2, stuff I said earlier. But like, I was never someone who got into Sega. I was always the Nintendo, PlayStation guy growing up. And then there's like so many different levels of consoles that you can get into. I mean, the stuff that was in the second generation, there was what I would call the rich people consoles, like the 3DO and the Neo Geo, the Philips CDI.
I think we'd all heard of Neo Geo, but no one I know or I have ever known has ever actually known someone who's bought a Neo Geo and owned it. Like, I know they exist.
Yeah.
And I saw them behind glass, but that was definitely a rich person's console.
Well, I know that some people had to buy like the 3DO. You know what I mean?
They're out there somewhere.
Like when that console was $700 and it had like nothing in terms of being like system sellers. I mean, they had like Road Rash or whatever, but I just can't imagine like the idea of plunking down that much money and then getting the 3DO and then just sitting around waiting for the games to come. And then they don't.
Are you familiar with the term nerd sniping?
No.
So nerd sniping is, you can look it up on Urban Dictionary, but it's a word we use in software. It's the act of presenting someone, usually a mathematician, a physicist, or a software person, with a time-consuming problem or challenge that is often impossible to complete in hopes that it appeals to their obsessive tendencies. So someone will say, oh, I was going to go on vacation and I got nerd sniped with this really interesting problem. And that just means you're like, oh, I could take pictures of all these video games. Oh, that's not really good quality. I could make them better quality. And do I need to do it at isomorphic? And what about the lighting? And do I do them transparent or not? And the next thing you know, you have an amazing hobby that spans a decade because you got nerd sniped.
Well, I did it to myself.
Yeah.
No one came by and said, you should try this. I'd be like, look what you made me do. Do you have any idea of the hours I put into this? In the beginning and everything, it was just fun. It was just a way to, explore photography. It was a way to like contribute to like this public stuff. Mm-hmm. And to me, like in the beginning, it was always just about like Wikipedia. It was about like the idea of like going in and just cleaning a place up. You know what I mean? Contributing, all that.
You're tidying up. You're giving it to the commons.
And also, like, I would think of myself as like, I'm going to take these photos, but it's not a big deal. It's just like on Wikipedia. It's I could be doing something else with my time. In terms of like, the couple of hours it takes to do the photos and edit them and everything. Like, I could have contributed something or I could have just been playing like video games by myself. You know what I mean? But, you put something out there, then it's out there.
So this is a podcast, and I'm going to put links in the show notes so folks can see these, and you can go and look up any video game console on Wikipedia, and you'll see this. But for those of us who are listening to the show, audio only right now, you're on a walk, let me just make sure you understand what this looks like. I'm looking at the GameCube one that you referenced a moment ago, and I want to just gush a little bit, and then I want you to explain what's going on here. It's so good, it looks like a 3D render. It's impossibly good. It looks like the idealized, perfect, floating in white space GameCube. Mm-hmm. How is that possible? Some of these break aparts, these explosions that you have, where you take apart and then set like a Nintendo, you disassemble it and float the pieces top. It looks like a render. Like I'm saying, there's no way you took this picture of a thing. It looks more real than my memory remembers it.
Well, what helps is once you get studio lights are a big game changer in terms of like the quality, because it lets you do a very high quality picture very fast, which means that you get like a lot of detail and you lock it in with the fast shutter speed. Because you can do natural light photos, but sometimes people have to like, have the shutter open for like an eighth of a second or a full second to be able to get the full light in at like an f8. this is photo talk, but
Mhm.
the equipment is a big part of it. If you're trying to take your photos with a camera phone, for example, you kind of have a ceiling in terms of the adjustments that you can make and the control that you have over like the way that it looks. But when you do something with, a higher quality lens, and then you have like the lights, then you have a lot more flexibility to kind of create the way that you want it to look. So that's a big part of the battle. It's also, staging in terms of having the lights, it's cleaning the system up. And then it's afterwards, it is the amount of time that you need to spend in Photoshop to actually take out all the nicks, all the dust, all the scuffs. Like everything that I take, even if it's really old, looks new because I make it look new. Or I try to find objects that are so close to what they should be that, that plus the Photoshop makes them look really like they came out yesterday.
Mhm.
I mean, because that's important to me,
Yeah.
because I want something like you kind of build after you do something for a while, you kind of build a philosophy about it. And like some of the things that I was thinking about when I started was like I didn't want the pictures to be like editorialized in terms of being like too flashy. I wanted them very direct. I wanted the focus just on the object. And then I wanted like full depth focus. I wanted flat lighting. So it's not like, too glaring, because there's a big difference between like, to me, like an encyclopedia should just represent the object. You should just fully see the object, see everything about it, versus something that's editorial being like if you were taking a photo for a spread of a magazine about the NES, that's when you kind of would play around with it, where you would have like
Mm.
colored backgrounds and stylized heavy contrast lighting. But
I see.
everything I did for like the photos, like I kind of had this like idea that it's like I want it to be consistent. I want it to be educational. And so that's the kind of style that I developed around, which is, it lends a lot to things looking perfect, I guess you could
Right.
say.
So these are not glamour shots of like, this it's SNES on the town or the GameCube, it's shot at Central Park. These are perfect individual expressions of the noun that is this object. And it looks
Yeah.
like you also, and this is an assumption here, you decided on angles. Like you went and you said, this is going to be isometric. Everything's going to be 30 degrees. You decided the point of view would be consistent across all pictures. It appears to me in
Yeah.
looking at your body of work, other than a couple of front on, like here's a Game Boy from the face,
Mhm.
everything is shot from the exact same perfect angle. Is that intentional?
Yeah. I mean, it was just part of the philosophy of how to do this project when I started in the beginning, because you really have to lay ground rules. I'm sure that this is kind of like similar for other things, or like coding that you would, have some insight on. But like when you try to tackle a big project with all these different elements, you want things to be consistent so they can look like they are a part of the same set, or that they have like the same kind of language out throughout. Like, you know what I mean? And then once you start doing something enough, you just kind of develop an innate style that would just translate through the work that you do.
Mm-hmm. Datadog is a monitoring, security, and analytics platform for developers, IT operations teams, security engineers, and business users in the cloud age. Their software as a service platform integrates and automates infrastructure monitoring, APM, and log management to provide a unified, real-time observability of their customers' entire technology stack. Datadog is used by organizations of all sizes and across a wide range of industries. It enables digital transformation and cloud migration, accelerates time to market, reduces mean time to resolution, and tracks key business metrics. Give Datadog a try with a 14-day free trial. Listeners of this podcast will also receive a free Datadog t-shirt. Visit datadoghq.com/hanselminutes-security. That's datadoghq.com/hanselminutes-security to get started today. So you start doing this, it's a hobby, you're living your life, you come upon, hey, I've got a new 3DO, or hey, I've got the Sega, Mega Drive, come over and take a photo of it. You're building this corpus of images, you're storing them up on the Wikimedia Commons, and I'm going to include links as well to the Vanimo Online Game Museum that we'll talk about more in a minute here. When did you start noticing your images elsewhere? What did that curve of usage look like?
Well, my contributions to Wikipedia has been on and off. I mean, it's not like a full on thing in terms of, you do it consistently every month. I mean, if I had like a Patreon or this was like a job,
Mm.
it would be, but considering it's a part-time thing and it's what I guess you would call a hobby,
Mm-hmm.
like you have hot and cold times. So I had done a bunch of work. I had met up with people, like I'd driven out to meet them or whatever, or met them. And, you kind of run into a wall at that point where it's like, well, I can't really do anything, or trying to go find people is not going to produce much work if you're just trying to get like 3 or 4 consoles. So I just kind of fell off the work for a while. And then I wasn't buying anything yet, really. Like I wasn't trying to go and spend money to get these consoles. So I had like a big break, and then I kind of was just consuming video game culture stuff. Like I watch a lot of YouTube videos about video games. I read websites about video games, and then you would notice that the pictures would be there on the articles. Like they're talking about the GameCube, and then that's my picture. In the beginning, it was so cool to just be like, "Oh, here's a picture of a Sony Walkman cassette player that I took." And now it's in this article about like the production of the Sony Walkman. This was a long time ago. It was like the Sony Walkman's officially ending repair something, and it was like on Wired, I think. But I was just like, oh my god, like I took that picture. Like I felt famous. You know what I mean? Um, but over time, the kind of thing that happens is when you have something on Wikipedia, uh, that picture, there's usually like 1 or 2 pictures a page, unless, it's like a bigger, thing where they have maybe like 5 or 6. But like if you go to a page for like the NES or something like that,
Mm-hmm.
or like some of the more obscure consoles, you generally have one picture there. And what happens with Google and the way that they do image searches and stuff is that image on like the obscure console page or whatever tends to become the highest rated image on Google image search. So what would happen is people would do Google image search for something that they were looking for, and then they would get my photos as the first thing to come up. And because it was high resolution, like I don't downsize the resolution, like it was full quality. Like I think that they just really lended itself well to reuse, and the fact that it's all in white. I mean, that's a very easy to plop down into a article kind of style. So people just kept finding like someone wanted a picture of this. They go to Google Images and then they found my picture and then they just went ahead and used it.
Mm-hmm.
So it wasn't really even Wikipedia. It was being tied to the Google image search, which ties heavily into Wikipedia's pictures to pull from for some things. So this whole kind of like popularity of the photos past Wikipedia was just like an unintended side effect of something I like in my mind. This was just for Wikipedia. Like this was a small thing. You know what I mean? And to see like over time, like the images just got popular, more popular and popular. Like it kind of blew my mind. And it was like, oh, like I could do stuff with this. I could try to make a plea to people to, say like, this is the work that I'm doing. If you want to help contribute, that'd be great. And then I started a Kickstarter to be like, just essentially that, where it was like, could you donate money to me? And then I'll buy video game consoles and then I'll make more galleries, or I'll do more in-depth galleries, because you can't really take something. If I'm coming to your house and you have like 20 things that I'm going to photograph, like I'm not going to take stuff apart. You know what I mean? Like
Mm-hmm.
I have to just basically put something on the table, take the photo, take the second photo, swap it out for the next item. But if you want to take something apart, get it all from all the different angles, do all
Mm-hmm.
that stuff, like you would spend the entire time on that one system, which isn't really practical.
And when people go and look at this, like you look up the Nintendo Entertainment System, you go and you see one page, you see one picture of the perfect picture on the Wikipedia page. When you dig into the comments, though, you have like 42 or 50 different pictures of all aspects of the device taken apart, different angles. I mean, everything that you could want, from the Rob, the NES robot, or the Power Glove, or on and on and on. So I don't want people to think that you went and took one individual perfect picture of each individual thing. This is a combinatorics of the canonical and perfect images inside and out from all angles of the last 40 plus years of
Well, it's
history.
not every console. Some consoles I only have one or two pictures of just because I haven't gone back and redone like an entire gallery of them. But one of the big sells for like the Kickstarter was the idea that I could do those kind of expanded galleries where you get to see the motherboard, where you get to see the pieces, like the controllers, the accessories. Like I put that Kickstarter out there at the beginning. I didn't really get much traction, but towards the very end of the Kickstarter, like I kind of put out an article on Gama Sutra about what I was doing and just explaining my story. And then that actually got a lot of traction. And then a lot of people picked the story up, and then that attention caused the Kickstarter to go over. And that attention also caught the attention of No Starch Press, who then came to me with a book deal in terms of being like, we see what you're doing. Do you want to turn this into a book? And I was of the opinion at the time that if someone comes up to you and says, do you want a book deal? I was like, yes, not really realizing what you're signing up for.
True.
In terms of the work that would go into that. But I said yes. And then I was like, oh my God, what am I doing?
I have been there on the book, on the same book deal situation. It's like the Ghostbusters, the famous line when they say, if someone asks you if you're a god, you say yes. So yeah, all your life, if someone walks up to you and says, get a book, make a book. Yes, absolutely, I'll do a book. And then you realize the immense amount of work. There's so much work in this book that I'm holding in my hand here. 300 plus pages, and the decisions I would imagine you would have to make. Because right now, by the way, as the time of this recording, your book is the #1 bestseller in history of technology on Amazon as this today.
Okay.
I've been spreading the word. This version 2.0 came out in September. Everyone that I can talk about, I'm wandering the streets talking to people about this book. So hopefully the word is getting out that this is good stuff. The 2.0 version includes a lot more updated stuff than the 1.0. But you still say in the book, like, well, here's some hard cuts and here's some hard decisions. And I'll tell you this, you probably haven't read this, but you have 1 4-star review, ton of 5-star reviews. And the person is complaining because you made some judgment call about, well, why feature that console and not this console? How did you make a decision like that?
Well, so I should also mention that the Game Console 2.0 is the second edition of the book. The game console, as it originally was, came out like 2-something years ago.
Yep.
And then during the pandemic, it was like I got the opportunity to be like, oh, we can do a second edition.
Mm-hmm.
And then, trying to do something during a pandemic is a lot different than the work that I had been doing before, where I could just go to places. There was like a reseller place, like a e-waste recycling place that had a bunch of stuff that I had imagined that I would go to for the second edition. But then when I tried to do it during the pandemic, they had closed down.
Aww.
So I wasn't able to get that. And then it was like, this was before the vaccine and everything. So it was I'm not going to try to go to random people's houses to try to find these things. I'm not going to try to meet up with strangers. It was very much like, this is what I have. This is what I can get. This is what I can spend money on, So I did like the best in terms of like what I think people are generally more interested in. The stuff that, I would have loved to include in the book would be things that are really kind of at the edge of what is considered a game console.
Mm-hmm. It's
like the, all those like European computers, like the Amstrad CPC. I did get like the ZX Spectrum in there. Mm-hmm. So I was able to do some of it, but not all of it. The MSX I got for the second edition. So the way that it kind of worked out in terms of like the book, the first edition comes out, I kind of had a tight deadline towards the end where things had to be wrapped up to be able to make the holiday deadline. And I didn't get to do some of the stuff that I had wanted to do in the first edition. So I kept always thinking about the second edition, like what I would have added to it. And so when I kind of approached them, they're like, okay, I gave them maybe an outline that had like 90 pages. And they're like, okay, we want you to scale that back. It ended up being a 54-page limit in terms of pages that I could add. Because in books, a signature is 16 pages. Did this come up with your book? I mean, you're probably white text. So white pages with text. So it's different than a 4-color process.
Right.
But like the pages can be very expensive. So like they try to keep things in a range based on price and everything.
But you still, to your credit, though, I want to just make sure that you're not downplaying yourself. You added 50 more consoles, variants, accessories, 50 added pages. You got even the latest Xbox Series X and the new stuff, but you also got super rare things like the Unisonic Champion 2711. And my favorite part is you talk about hardware emulation and discussions of things like optical drive emulators, and even what happens when these devices break down. So for folks like me who are interested in, getting HDMI or SCART out on an existing device, you cover things like that as well, which I think is really great.
Yeah, so like the whole like idea for like the second edition was like, okay, I have the consoles that I want to add. I have the extra pages to where I can add them. I had to shuffle everything around to get everything in chronological order. Like, because that was one of the things about the first edition. The pages are kind of random in terms of like the distribution of the consoles within a generation. Originally, my idea was that like you would have like the major consoles up front and then like the minor consoles in the back as single pages. But I think people just wanted things to be chronological. So that took a lot of shuffling to be able to do that, because the way that the book is laid out is like everything's either a spread or a spread of single pages, like 2 individual consoles on each side.
Yeah.
Like I don't do a 3-page spread and then a 4th page with a new console. It's just internal rules that I had for myself to try to make things very consistent. But doing the shuffling of the pages means that I had to do some things to make the system work. Like there's a second page for the LJN video art of the interior of the system. Like I think it's an interesting shot, but it was also a page that I had to add to make the spacing work. You know what I mean? So it'd be like kind of like, it was like trying to fit everything together was kind of a puzzle in a sense. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Well, you're playing Tetris with pictures, and you've got also these deconstructions, which I really have to emphasize. I realize we're on a podcast, but having the board, the top, the inside, the chords, and then stacking them on top of each other like a layer cake really lets you realize what's inside, especially those early consoles. You comment that some of the consoles had no real logic. All of the logic was on the chips themselves.
Well, that was the Magnavox Odyssey, because it doesn't have an IC processor. It's just like logic. I mean, have you ever seen how the Magnavox Odyssey works in terms of like, it's just a dot that you move around on the screen, and then you have to kind of like use your imagination to pretend that you're playing games. I'm not even kidding. It's
no,
very
I know.
abstract.
I mean, hey, I played Adventure, right? Where you run around fighting dragons in a dungeon and you are a dot. And the only thing that's interesting in that entire game is the dragon. And everything else is, I'm a square.
Yeah. I mean, back then you would have like the boxes with the amazing art to represent what the game should be. And then it's like stick figure people, inside, because that's the best you could do at the time. No, but I love the evolution of the construction of consoles, because it's like the way that the boards look for some of those second generation consoles is just so fascinating, because it's, everyone's used to like modern construction. Like if you take something apart, motherboards look the same. You know what I mean? You got tiny little boards, surface mount things. But like in the second generation, when they were kind of really figuring this stuff out, like it was just like, do whatever you want. Like if you want to make the Fairchild Channel F just a giant silver board, do it. So some of them are really interesting to look at. And one of the things that I will say about the book, so the book is a photographic history of game hardware specifically in terms of looking at the evolution of these physical objects, these things, because there's a really one screenshot of a video game in the system or in the book, which is Pong, because I drew that myself. Because it's just squares. You know what I mean?
Yep.
But it's not something that you get to see like screenshots of games. And that was a very deliberate decision, just because I feel like if you go down that route, and I've seen books go down that route, it can be very crowded and distracting in terms of, the way that, you would have to allot page count to these things, or it would scrunch up stuff on it. The way that I really kind of imagined the book in terms of like the way it's laid out and presented is like if you're going into a museum exhibit and then you go up to something that's in the case, and you walk around it and you have the little card that you read. So that's why it's like big pictures, brief things about the console, very much inspired by museum displays.
That is a really great way to put it, actually. That's what it felt like reading the book, enjoying the book, sharing the book with my kids. It feels like just a wonderful walk through a museum. And in closing, I understand that you had, again, a successful Kickstarter. I'm going to have links to the book and as well as your website at evan-amos.com.
Oh, I haven't done anything with that in a while.
But there's still links to the books and information about, what you're doing. But I also want to point out that this is a great way to learn about the history. And you have these physical devices that you're going to make sure are seen, right? You have purchased some physical devices, but you don't want to just keep them in your personal collection because then they're just going to collect dust and be in a closet somewhere. So there's a potential for not just a digital archive, but some physical things that'll be shared with, like, I think, what, NYU?
Maybe. It's been difficult to figure out what to do with stuff because at this point, I live in a Brooklyn apartment, which is small. I don't know what the Portland's. You probably live in a house, right?
Yeah. Or I live out in where the cows are. I'm in the rural area.
Oh, okay. So, yeah, living in the city, things are tight. I have a lot of wire shelves. I mean, I have pictures of it in the book where you can just see the insanity of the systems and the amount of space that this stuff takes up. But it's just trying to figure out, what do you keep on hand? Like if I needed to do a photo of something, how difficult is it to get? What's not necessary? Like if you take photos of something, should you get rid of it? Should you keep it around? It's hard to play kind of like what to do with something like that because, this is essentially a museum quality collection at this point in terms of like the amount of stuff that you can build up. And I know that some guys probably like really enjoy having like all the stuff around, but to me, it's stuff on a shelf in terms of like the physical space it takes up. I mean, there's stuff that I love from the collection, but then there's like a lot of things like, I don't care about the Tiger R zones, Do you know what the Tiger R zone is? That horrible.
No,
you remember the LCD handheld games? Remember?
Oh, yeah. It reminds me of the, the excitement around the Nintendo Game & Watch that everyone's talking about, the little LCDs.
Yeah. Well, imagine like the ones that came out in like the 80s and 90s where it was just super basic. Now imagine if you just took the LCD screen out from that and then popped it into a visor. Yeah. That's very difficult to see.
Right.
And, it's the idea that
and it just hovers over your face like a Google Glass. Yeah, like a 1980s Google Glass with two colors, red and yellow.
Yeah, or you would do the they have like a little handheld adapter version or like a projected screen. But the thing is, you can't see these things. They do not work well in terms of like. No, I mean, there's lots of history in terms of video game hardware, and there's a lot of winners and there's a lot of losers. You know what I mean?
Yep.
I appreciate the history that the Tiger Gamecom brings. Another bad Tiger product, but the Tiger Gamecom is hot garbage in terms of like trying to play that system and enjoy it. Like it's got a real smudgy screen that you can barely see. It's not backlit, or at least the original wasn't. And it's kind of that struggle where it's like, oh, I want to enjoy these things, but it's like, they're not fun to play. You know what I mean?
And they're taking up space in your apartment.
Yeah. Like the Philips CD, I have like 4 Philips CDIs because there's so many different versions of that system. And the Tetris CDI game is nice. It has great music, but like a lot of those Tetris CDI FMV games were done better on different systems. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I'm sure that you had stuff that you really enjoyed as a kid, like stuff that was like Atari level, whatever. Have you ever tried to really go back and play those games again?
It doesn't hold up, which is one of the funny things about retro gaming is that you go back as far as your memory, your memory tells you it was better than it was.
Yeah.
A great example I like to use is the Halo Master Chief Collection. And you boot it up and it looks amazing. And it looks like your memory. And then they have a button that lets you switch between how it actually looked versus the remastered version. And the remastered version is using the upscaler in your brain that reminded you what it looked like. But the reality is it was pretty messed up. I tried to go and play Larry Bird and Dr. J basketball, and it doesn't hold up. So it's more fun to collect retro games. I can go back as far as Metroid. Anything pre-Metroid I find to be quite tedious, and I try to avoid
the
playing.
Second generation is so fascinating because it's very American-centric in terms of like, it was the hot new thing. Atari's got all this fame and they're like arcades are blowing up. Everyone's throwing their hat into the ring. It was a relatively low entry to gain in terms of like, you just throw like one of the standard 8-bit processor chips in your system. And then you just throw like, some programmers at it and they can make some games for you.
Hmm.
But now trying to do that would be practically impossible, in
Yeah.
terms of like, oh, you want to have your own hardware? Like, well, you're not going to make it because even like Sony and Microsoft are using like AMD stuff. I mean, people tried those micro consoles from like the Android processors, but that didn't work out.
There's such a tragedy that there was such a diversity, not just of software, but of console and of hardware. The same thing happened with phones. If for the people who remember what was a phone before it was a black slab, it was this wonderful, colorful, ridiculous attempt in all different shapes and sizes and colors to get it right. And the same thing happened in video games. And now we have two, right? Or three if you count the PC, right? It's just like we have these slabs. This is a thing. This is a video game console. It's sad that we'll never get back there again to this diversity of hardware. But I love that it is captured in your book. I want to point people to the Game Console 2.0, a photographic history from Atari to Xbox. And thank you so much, Evan Amos, for chatting with me today.
Oh, you're welcome. Thank you for having me.
This has been another episode of Hansel Minutes, and we'll see you again next week.